So I'd like to welcome everyone today to our very special webinar that we're extremely excited to present. And that is sharing the story of Parkinson's in Kenya that's being revealed through the film Shaking Hands with the Devil. Our panelists and film creators are with us today, and they are all joining us from the UK. So we welcome them for staying up a little later, joining us here in the US where we're presenting the course. And I'd like to do a brief introduction, and of course you'll see our presenters and have the opportunity to speak with them directly immediately following the film. So let me begin with David Plummer. He serves as executive producer, and consultant for the film. David is a wildlife photographer and film consultant, a best-selling author, conservationist, teacher, mentor, and inspirational speaker. In 2009, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's when he was 40 years old, and he's been fighting for awareness and a cure since. He's also the impetus for this project and the storyteller in the film. We're also joined by Olz McCoy. Olz was the director, cinematographer, and editor. Olz is a young and emerging film director from London. His films are powerful, meaningful, and emotional, and you will experience that today, driven by the belief that film is the best medium both to entertain and to educate. And he's trying to make the world a better place, one film at a time. And finally, Dr. Natasha Fothergill-Misbah, and she served as producer and researcher. And Tosh is a Kenyan postdoctoral research associate working at Newcastle University. Her research uses qualitative methods and is focused around global health, aging, and Parkinson's disease. We have in your handout links for each of these very accomplished presenters. So I gave the highest level introduction, but I encourage you to follow these links and learn more about their work and their mission that they each individually have. A few quick logistics. You are all here now. Everyone's microphones are muted. You can ask questions at any time, either through the chat or the question and answer panel. And following the film is when we'll open that up to be able to answer those questions. There is a handout to this. It was emailed ahead of time. It will be emailed afterwards, and it's also in the chat. For those of you attending for CEUs or to provide us feedback, a survey will launch immediately following. And for professionals who would like to use this 1-hour presentation for continuing education credit, this is a self-report CE activity, so it's not ASHA or state registered, but you can use the materials that we've given you, the learning objectives, and the certificates that you can obtain by emailing webinars@lsvtglobal.com if you are viewing live. If you're viewing on demand, you must complete the survey, and the survey link will be in the materials related to the video. And you can also email webinars@lsvtglobal.com with any question. Please note licensing requirements for self-reported CEUs vary from state to state, so you'll need to check individually to see if this presentation meets those requirements. Because this is a CE event, we have our disclosures, which are displayed here and also included in your handout. And finally, our learning objectives are that you will be able to identify at least 3 drivers of stigma for people with Parkinson's disease in Kenya. Express the impact of having no access to basic medication for people living with Parkinson's, and to summarize one call to action to address the challenges of stigma in Parkinson's. With that, before we get started, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Cynthia Fox. I will serve as your moderator, and I'm also CEO and co-founder of LSVT Global, but I'm a speech language pathologist by trade. So let's launch this poll and just get a snapshot of who is joining us in the audience today. So you have the ability now to interact with the poll. And we'll give it just a moment for everybody to be able to respond. And Beth, when you're ready, you feel like it's filled up, you can share the results. Okay, so we can see we've got a nice range. We have a good number of people with Parkinson's, family and caregivers. A lot of our LSVT Loud and LSVT Big certified speech, physical, and occupational therapists. Some other healthcare professionals and students who are not yet certified, and others who didn't quite fit into one of our categories. So wonderful. Welcome again. We are thrilled to have you with us. So now, without further ado, and we'll close that poll, let's get to the viewing of the film. The film is approximately 13 to 15 minutes in duration. You will have a link to the film, so if any of the viewing is a little disjointed due to the internet connection, you can view it at any time, and we'll want you to please share it after the viewing of the film here today. So I give to you Shaking Hands with the Devil.
My name is David Plummer. In 2009, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. In this short documentary, I intend to highlight the plight of Parkinson's sufferers in Kenya. Little did I know making it would leave me shocked, exhausted, and withdrawn. It seems like paradise when you first get here, looking at this gorgeous sunrise and on the beach. But I've learned, having Parkinson's disease, this place could be hell sometimes. With this film, I'm hoping to change perception. I've never been one for championing raising awareness historically, because my thoughts are everyone knows what Parkinson's disease is. I just want to find a bloody cure. But where I've worked abroad, I'm fighting not only trying to find a cure, but trying to raise awareness. People don't even know what it is. I set off on my journey to meet sufferers and their families who had previously been identified by Dr. Natasha Fothergill-Misbah, a specialist on Parkinson's research in Kenya. I decided to come off my medication when meeting these sufferers because most of them had no access to medication or health care.
So when he first got sick, we didn't even know what the problem was ourselves.
He had problems in almost every system of the body. He had even developed tremors.
Sababu ya urefu. Ndo ugonjwa ule wakati ambao nilikuwa sijui ugonjwa huu ni ugonjwa gani.
And with the community around, well, the first thing they thought was that you're giving him a lot of stresses. The stress has brought this disease.
Gago nago pia nakuzambirizwa mimi mchungaji mimi na kamba kuja kanisani kila siku. Hayo ndo utapata manufaa. Lakini uko nako pia sio manufaa kugusi. Mwanzo kabisa ili tulikuwa tunapata dawa lakini hayafanyi kazi. Nilifikia kwamba hii ni nguvu za mapepo. Kulingana na experience ile nimekuwa nayo kwa kazi ya Mungu, naona wakati mwingine hivyo spirit waziko.
Hao nao wanafanya kuwatia tu kujaribu, lakini they are not sure for what they are treated.
I took him to a doctor. He is the first person who diagnosed that there was something called Parkinson.
Even after being diagnosed and even taking the medication, Mom still felt like, no, we can just pray and this thing can end.
On my family, it really affected us. In fact, it really brought us down to almost zero because the drugs were very expensive and not easy to find.
For me, it has been a burden. I've been having a burden in my heart, a very big burden. Sometimes I do get emotional, but I don't want him to see it. Like sometimes I can feel like I want to cry, but again, I just walk away. Because missing my dad has been my superhero.
You stay with a patient like that for a long time. He becomes part of you in life. And when he leaves you, there's a lot of great loneliness you'll suffer.
If he would just rest. Sometimes you think that, like, God, if you just can't help Dad, if the medication just can't help, then just let him rest.
I was introduced to a private healthcare doctor who only confirmed these stories.
In a private, you can see like 100 patients, like on average. In a public, you can see 2,000. So you might miss some diagnoses and some patients presenting with obvious symptoms. If you're not diagnosed correctly, you'll just be hopping around diagnosis. Taking this medication for the wrong diagnosis, so many people will give up on the medication. Can they afford the medication? Can they afford to go and see the neurologist or the neurosurgeon? There is so many misbelief or trust in medicinal or herbal treatment, and also some way into witchcraft.
Anyone living with Parkinson's disease anywhere in the world knows what stigmatization is. Stigmatization is bad enough, but it can lead to persecution. And sometimes this persecution can take on extreme forms.
Most people don't know about Parkinson's. Most people don't know. Here, I mean, in the villages, they are not aware about the Parkinson's. They just still think it is something associated with evil spirits.
Initially, I thought maybe it's some witchcraft, because since it does not have a cure.
Some says it's a curse from their ancestor. If they see him, they say, that is a witchcraft. They run away.
People see it as a bad omen or something like that. They associate it with some evil, some spirits which are not there.
Since Dad is a pastor, he had a lot of pastor friends coming over. They would come, pray. When they were praying and then he starts shaking, they would see that those were the manifestation of demons. And they would just insist on casting those demons out of him.
Walifikiria ya kwamba mimi nimeleta nguvu za mapepo. Kaona ni nguvu za mapepo, lakini haikuwa nguvu za mapepo. Ilikuwa ni ugonjwa wa Parkinson.
Even personally, I have an auntie who was telling me, you know what, that shaking, we can be treated. It can be treated by local medicines and all that.
They cut you in small bits in the skin. So, and then they put herbs in those areas that are being incised. If let's say you have tremors, they'll cut on the arm. They'll do several cuts and then put some medicine or herbals in those cuts.
Hawakuji tena. They just avoiding. They can transmit the disease to their body through shaking hands. Maybe come into contact, maybe sitting close to him. So we are not seeing them again.
Then they were like blaming him. What have you done? Where have you put yourself? Are you in some cult or something?
You see, most of the elderly people, they are based in the rural areas. And most of them, they live alone. So if you see an old man or an old woman living alone with nothing, maybe the way she is, she's unkempt, nobody's looking after her. So the next thing, she would be branded a witch. They have gone to the extent of just killing the people.
There's a lot of old men that are being, because they suspected him that are witchcraft. The youth, they organize a group, and then they go to the old man. They say he's a witchcraft, and then they kill him.
The young people come and kill you if they are sure you are doing witchcraft.
There are 3 old men just last month. They were killed because of that.
They see anything happening that they don't understand how it is happening and how it is started and how it is going. They come to a conclusion that one is bewitched. It is devilish powers that is working or has been thrown to him.
It's very bad because them say he's struggling for his life, and yet someone is coming here to shortcut his life. That's no good.
I found myself withdrawing, hiding away after several days of malignant scrutiny. And the shocking trauma of what I was hearing began to take its toll on me. After such a roller coaster of medication and emotion, I hit a wall.
So I'm totally off meds now because, I don't know, I think we've been pushing hard pace to get this film. This is what it's like being off. Fucking hell. So I don't want to be sympathetic or self-indulgent. I just can't imagine how they live. They just rely on families or the goodwill of someone close to them, with the threat of possibly people coming to kill them for being witches. And imagine that fear. They're just trying to exist, trying to stay alive. They don't even know what they've got. They've not even been told. Truly, shame on anyone who stigmatizes and, let alone, persecutes them.
A major change of belief needs to be addressed. The rule of law needs to be enforced. Public awareness of all disabilities needs to be raised. And for heads of state to take this on board and end this brutality.
Lakini chakula ni ile ya tabu, na vile siendi kazi,
inanibidi maisha yangu iko hapo sasa, narudi chini.
ningepata chakula, ningesaidika na dawa.
First and foremost, people have got to get educated.
It's just a matter of awareness, education, information, and it can be managed.
I think it's beneficial to the patient to know that they're not alone, and you can reach out to someone suffering from the same ailment as you, and it's not something foreign, it's not something unknown. Right? There are support groups where people find more comfort sharing, and they get comfortable with their condition. They know and they understand what's going on with their system and their body. I think it's crucial to the long plan of the treatment and management of a patient.
It's a cliche, I think, that this week has certainly been a roller coaster. But I do think we have scratched beneath the surface of things that people aren't talking about. There's a distinct lack of medication here, or access to medication, and I think there's a distinct lack of awareness or total absence of knowledge of what this disease is. It's not witchcraft, it's not superstition, it's not cursed, it's just a disease. And these people have the basic right to be treated like normal human beings.
There are glimmers of hope as volunteer support groups begin to emerge in Kenya. Yet these support groups need support themselves, which must come from the government. Kenya, like any other country, is generally made up of good people. But evil happens when good people do nothing.
So I recall the first time I saw that film at the World Parkinson Congress. It got me then, it got me now. Woo! All right, David, I want to start with you. Tell us the story that motivated you to make this film.
Hello everyone. I've worked in Sri Lanka. I've worked abroad most of my adult life as a wildlife photographer, and COVID stepped in and stopped everyone traveling. And my first trip was in January 2023 last year to Sri Lanka, and I've experienced stigmatization in the UK and abroad, but this had a different level. It was very malignant. It was very unpleasant. People were staring at me. People were commenting. And at the airport I decided to leave the country early. As I exited, I was arrested for sort of things they couldn't explain. I'd gone, maybe it was the anxiety. I went through an off stage when I got to the airport. The airline themselves actually called the police at the airport, and I was surrounded by 5 armed police officers who took me to a room and detained me. And I was not allowed to take any medication. So in essence, I was angry. I was very angry. And I realized people in other countries had no voice. And I was put in touch with Tash, and I think we sort of decided a long, convoluted route to make a documentary to give the people that have no voice a voice.
Yes, and your drive to action was impressive, because the timeline was, as you said, your trip was in January. I recall Tosh getting us on a call, I think in February, when it was like you decided to go. You're on the ground in March, and the film is released in July of last year, first published at the WPC. So kudos to you all, because many of us have a vision and years go by and we're still working on it, but your drive and your call to action is so admirable. One more quick question for you, David, and then I've got a question for Tosh. I think for me, one of the things that just so struck me, and one of the very poignant scenes, is when you're laying on the ground completely off medication. And I think, especially in Western culture, we assume medication is there, right? We're about people being optimally medicated, and then what can we do beyond that to give the best quality of life? And so, what was that experience like for you? And, I think it's raising awareness about just basic medication is not being available.
Yes, it was really hard coming off meds. And it was on-off meds, which apparently is very dangerous, I've heard subsequently. But I think it was essential to do in order to connect, because I didn't want to look like a rich guy going in and them looking at me with envy. Why does he get medication when I don't? And essentially they were the same as me, and we all spoke the same language, and not literally, figuratively. We had the same issue, but totally different care systems. And I think in our wealthier nations, we have that 20-year opportunity of managing it with medication. And these people in lower economy countries have no access to medication. So their disease just progresses unmanaged.
Yeah, such an important point to bring to awareness. Tosh, I'm going to come to you and your paper and the research that you've done that aligned perfectly with David's drive here to bring this to light. But you describe a number of drivers as stigma, and I'll list a few that you talk about in your research. Poor awareness of Parkinson's, lack of clinical capacity, supernatural beliefs, stereotypes, fear of contagion, and blame. And I wonder, are any one of these a more dominant player in marginalization? And is there any one of them that might be easier to tackle than others?
Thank you, Cynthia. Yeah, I'm glad that you rattled those off because it's been a while since I read my paper. So I think maybe all of it stems from the awareness, essentially. So that lack of awareness about what Parkinson's is, not just among the general population, but actually among healthcare professionals as well. And when I was doing my research, it wasn't rare for healthcare workers, doctors in kind of primary settings in the community to say that we don't have Parkinson's here, or like Parkinson's doesn't exist in Kenya. So when you've got healthcare professionals that don't understand it, you've got no chance really in the kind of general community. And so that lack of awareness really feeds into the supernatural beliefs associated with witchcraft. It's a very kind of easy explanation for something that you don't understand or you have no kind of alternative explanation for. And then the supernatural beliefs also feed into the kind of blame around what have you done to cause this? You must have done something if there's kind of no medical explanation for it. Did you kind of curse someone, or what was it that you did to get this? And then there's the fear of contagion, not necessarily just from Parkinson's. You heard the lady in the film say that people are scared that they could get it, but also potentially the curse that caused it. So it kind of trickles down, and then there's the facilitators. So it's all very well understanding the drivers, but actually you have to understand the broad social political processes that surround that. Things like lack of health policy, lack of access to medicines, limited rights for people who live with disabilities. And we talked a lot about this not just necessarily being a problem for Parkinson's, but a kind of an issue for disabilities more generally, and human rights. So yeah, there's I think awareness probably is the thing that could be tackled kind of now, and it would trickle down into the rest of the drivers as well.
Yeah, that surprised me just now, hearing that even the physicians, if they weren't specialized, actually are not overly aware of Parkinson's and the impact that must have. Yeah, it's a little hard to kind of wrap your brain around, I think.
Yeah, and it just creates challenges with diagnosis as well. And I know somebody put in the question in about misdiagnosis, but if you go to your kind of primary community level care, nobody's going to know what is wrong with you if they don't understand it. So you kind of jump around doctors and maybe move up to secondary care, and then a few months, years later, you might end up finally a referral in a tertiary system where there are neurologists. By that time, it could be years after misdiagnosis, and putting the wrong treatment, we heard in the film as well. So that period from thinking something is wrong to actually finding out that you might have Parkinson's, and they're the lucky ones, the ones who have the resources to actually get to that point where they get the diagnosis. So yeah, many people don't reach that point ever.
So you've answered the question, I think, that came in. It's hard to know what the rate of Parkinson's is if the diagnosis is not there, and misdiagnoses is common.
Yeah, so there's some, to say that we're doing a prevalence study in Kenya starting in April. So this will be going into the community, so not relying on kind of people who reach care, but actually going door to door in a demographic surveillance site and understanding the prevalence. So we'll know what it is in Kenya very soon.
You can answer that one soon.
Yeah.
That's great. That's definitely a step. And please, for everyone listening, feel free to prepare your questions, type them in, raise your hands. I've got one more for Olz, and then I'll stop asking all mine and let you ask yours. For you, Olz, so first of all, did you know much about Parkinson's or the Parkinson's community when you started this? And then from the film technical aspect and from the filmmaking aspect, what were the challenges? What was this like?
I didn't know a huge amount of Parkinson's because I made a film with David in I think 2022. And that's kind of going into that. I didn't know anything about Parkinson's at all. I just came across David's story being a wildlife photographer with Parkinson's, and so just kind of found out a lot about it through making that film. And then yeah, it was when David connected with Tash and then brought me in as well. So kind of I had an awareness because of the prior film, but I didn't have any awareness of kind of Parkinson's or the other types of symptoms that are associated with it, and absolutely no awareness of obviously the global problem in places like Africa with Parkinson's. So this was all very eye-opening to me, and I read Tasha's paper before we went, and it's kind of like it's hard to believe this stuff exists and happens if you don't have the kind of the first-hand stories to hear about it. And then I think the biggest challenges were definitely the time, because as you said, we had about 2 weeks from kind of having the green light of doing this and then landing on the ground. So it was kind of having to prepare so much with so little time and not really knowing what we were going into either. I think it's kind of the only thing we really had was Tasha's paper and Tasha's contacts on the ground when she'd done her paper. So it was kind of like as we landed, we just straight away, it's like, okay, let's meet up with the contacts. Let's try and where are these people? What are their stories? Can we find them? And then I think the other one that I didn't anticipate before was actually a sound issue. It's obviously people who are either not on medication or off medication and they're constantly moving. So actually getting and attaching a microphone to them and getting audio that's kind of clean and not constantly ruffling against clothing and movement. It's something that I didn't anticipate happening beforehand. So that was one to know for the future.
Right, right. Well, and of course we know the soft voices as well, right? So people with Parkinson's in particular, off medication, affecting communication. Well, you did a brilliant job, a brilliant job.
Thank you.
We have another question coming from the audience. Have you approached the Michael J. Fox Foundation to increase awareness in Kenya and globally? So I don't know, David, do you want to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, that's assuming it's our job. And the whole purpose of this film is to make the general public aware in our own nations, but also to take it to decision makers. And I think then the next level this needs to go to is not we're campaigning to get this awareness up. It's in effect holding people to account. So we want everyone here that is watching this bit or at this webinar to actually approach their decision makers to deal with stigmatization and persecution in your own country, but also internationally as well. And I think a lot of nations have got elections coming up, and I think these are big issues that have to be dealt with when considering your candidates for election.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's no one person's job, it's all our jobs. All our jobs. Yeah, yeah. Deborah, I see you have your hand raised, and Beth, if you can help me behind the scenes to allow Deborah to answer her question here. And Deborah, I see you're muted. I don't know if you have the opportunity to unmute. While we're getting Deborah on mic here, Lori has asked, is there a clinic or plans to start a clinic there? And so Tosh, maybe you can talk about the work that you're doing actively with the support groups and kind of where that's going.
Yeah, so currently there's one public neurology clinic, and that is based in the capital city in Nairobi. So there is a public neurology clinic where people can go. The area that we did the filming is on the coast of Kenya, and there is currently no kind of government clinic. There is a private clinic kind of 150 100 kilometers away, But the site is one of our sites in a research grant that I'm working on at the moment. So our plan is to establish a Parkinson's clinic in the area, as well as a support group, as well as train a kind of multidisciplinary team. Excuse me. So we're hosting a movement disorders course in Nairobi in April, and so encouraging clinicians, nurses, allied health professionals from the area to come to the course, so then they have the skills to diagnose, treat, manage Parkinson's, and take it back to the community. So yes, plans are in motion, so hopefully the situation will improve, as well as plans to improve access to medication as well, which is another big issue.
And just to translate that 150 kilometers for the American audience, that's 93 miles.
Thank you. Thank you. Much appreciated. Yes, yes. Okay, so we've got Deborah. I'm not sure if you're able to get your microphone unmuted, but we have another hand raised. Beth, we've got Dova-san.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for that insightful film. I think it speaks a lot. I'm just kind of wondering, I think I wrote that question on the chat. I was wondering, what is, I was just kind of wondering what's the rate of Parkinson's cases? Do you guys know how many cases rate in Kenya? And potentially, from the fact that there's 1 or 2 clinics around, and I know that there could probably be several misdiagnoses of Parkinson's, based on the fact that most people believe it was food, it was herbs, it was witchcraft, whatever it is. I'm wondering whether there is a lot of diagnosis.
Should I take that one?
Yes, please.
Yes. Yes, so we don't know what the prevalence is, the rate of Parkinson's is in Kenya currently. I mentioned earlier that we're actually conducting a prevalence study in Kenya starting in May. So in a few months' time, we should have the answer to your question, but I don't have the answer right now. We've got rates from neighboring Tanzania from back in 2007, so a little bit outdated now, which were rates of about 40 people per 100,000 population, which is a bit lower than the rest of the world, but I would probably anticipate that will have increased now since then. Regarding misdiagnosis, yes, absolutely, lots of challenges. So I replied to your question in the chat with a paper about the challenges of diagnosis, which will tell you a lot more about that aspect of the challenges, another aspect of challenges with Parkinson's. I hope that answers.
I know you said that you did this in Mombasa. Where are you doing your preference? Are you guys moving away further to Nairobi, where maybe there's the largest hospital with the largest specialty practices?
No, so the prevalence study will be in Kilifi County, just up the coast from Mombasa. And so it will be a community survey, so it's not relying on people who are accessing the clinic. So we're going door to door with screening questions and identifying people from the community. So we'll get an accurate rate of Parkinson's prevalence.
I mean, I'm just curious why you chose Kilifi. Kilifi seems like it's too rural. I'm just wondering.
Parkinson's doesn't, it affects the population quite evenly. Just because there's more people doesn't mean that the rate will be any different. So we'll find a rate within the population that we have. And there's a very good demographic surveillance site in Kilifi through KEMRI. So it just makes life a little bit easier as well.
So you guys are, using Kilifi and KEMRI kind of.
Yes.
The convenience. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. I know in your research, Tosh, that you talked about, and I'm interested in David, you too, what you experienced while you were on the ground, that many people were being, I don't know if shamed is the right word, but from working, either like, oh, you should stay home and take care of the person, or it's, embarrassed to be out. But we know, especially when we have our therapist watching, exercise, movement, activity, engagement is so critical for Parkinson's. So what are the challenge, when you talked about that in your research, what were the challenges? Were the people with Parkinson's wanting to be out and being held back by those around them? Or what was that dynamic?
I guess a little bit of both. So some people it was sort of like, yeah, what are you doing? They should be at home, not working, kind of a combination of they might be old and not able to be outside and therefore they should stay at home. But also when you put yourself out into the public, there are more opportunities for stigmatization and for people to kind of see you and to then put the blame, the judgments on you. But other people who really just didn't want to kind of go out because they thought that people would have those views towards them. So it was kind of a double, and it depended on the person. So we have, there's stories of older people in Kenya kind of being locked away and in their homes, those who are accused of witchcraft and literally like locked in their homes. Stories from Uganda about people literally being like, yeah, not let out of the house and kind of having food fed through the wall or a hole in the wall type of thing, and like chained up. Not just Parkinson's, there's this colleagues made a film on psychosis in Kilifi, and it's called The Man in Chains because they literally chained this man to kind of a place in his home. So yeah, it's a lot of kind of nuances around that, but definitely an issue.
And because we heard stories as well, someone said that like the taxi drivers and the bus drivers wouldn't let the person onto their vehicles. It's kind of like, even though the close family might want them to go out and they want to go out, it's kind of the wider community just wouldn't facilitate that.
So that really narrows down their kind of world
where you're able to able to be and go.
Right. And David, I'm sure you heard some personal stories as you interacted with the people in the communities.
Yes, ironically, having gone through this, I've withdrawn. It was quite hard to do. It was very hard to do. And having gone through that stigmatization so openly, and I felt it, I have definitely withdrawn, even coming back to the UK. I don't want to undergo it again. And so that's an ironic sort of turnaround for me. I think I've always been defiant in the past, but having done this, I've become less so.
Wow. I don't know if you can put into words, explain, I guess, the extremeness of, the difference between, as you say, you've experienced, anyone with Parkinson's has experienced stigmatization, but how different that was for you, both in Sri Lanka, which was the motivation, as well as your time in Kenya. I don't know if it's possible to really explain.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the UK, stigmatization would be I'd go out and people would accuse me of being drunk if I had dyskinesia. I went to Sri Lanka and I was in some, expensive hotels, and the staff were laughing at me in the restaurant if I was making a mess with my food, or the very movements that I was making. In Kenya, you could feel the unpleasantness of people's intention as they stare at you. I don't think a well-bodied person can quite understand, and they almost say, well, just ignore it. It's a little bit difficult because you just feel constantly on show, and the anxiety itself makes the symptoms worse. So the more they stare at you, the worse you get, and it's really quite difficult to deal with.
Wow. Well, thank you for doing that and putting yourself out there. And wow, it's so powerful. So Olz and Tosh, for you, that had to be hard to be a witness to that. in the filming process, but yet respect the authenticity of the experience. I don't know, Olz, how was that?
It was really difficult. I mean, I think kind of every night that we came back from filming, during the whole day, it's kind of we just had to sit there in silence and kind of just take it all in and take the time to process it. Because it affects you, obviously emotionally as well when you are witnessing it. And you might not be able to understand it on every level, but yeah, you can definitely feel it. And hopefully this kind of the film helps others feel it and understand it a little bit and want to change to help.
Well, and I think that I hope that message comes through. It does to me, and it doesn't have to be that extreme, right? I mean, just even the smallest thing that we be kind, right? You never know what people are dealing with, and our ability as a society to embrace that and recognize, people are going through all kinds of things physically, visually, mentally, maybe when we don't know. And sometimes there are a lot of silent elements of Parkinson's when it is well medicated. So that's a great point. This is a question, and Tasha, I'm gonna tap you on this because you've done research broadly about stigma. Are there areas in the U, and then I'll take a stab at it too. But are there areas in the US with similar lack of access to diagnosis, treatment, medication, or support?
I believe so. I've heard a lot of stories from colleagues and friends in the Parkinson's world in the US who kind of relay very similar stories in terms of that deep stigma, challenges with access to a diagnosis, and then the ongoing treatment, medication, and support. So I think it very much depends where in the US that you live, and also people from different ethnic backgrounds experience more challenges in relation to diagnosis, treatment, medication support. So yes, I think it's a huge problem in the US and everywhere, to be honest. I don't think that the US is exempt from any of these issues. I think sometimes if you live in a bubble, you don't realize that other people have those challenges. But yeah, I'm sure you have more experience with it, Cynthia.
Yeah, well, yes, and I think the answer is yes, and it might be on a spectrum of, the best access to the least, and UK, I'm certain is equal there as well, and it just highlights the inequities, I think, sometimes in access. Yeah, I see there is. Okay, a comment or question from here. These stories of stigmatization are the same for people with disabilities in Kenya. Okay, including children, adults with various conditions. Even those in urban areas and from higher income families are often denied access to diagnosis and medications, as families do not want to spend the money on people when they think it's an aging issue.
So Emma used to live in Kenya, and so she knows a lot about the situation there. But she's absolutely right. And matatus, these public buses, they're very kind of, they go, and if you're taking a little bit of time to get out of the bus, then they'll leave without you. One of my participants in my research, when I did it, basically said that he fell out of matatus quite often because they just wouldn't stop or they wouldn't help him, and then he'd be called drunk on the street, and it was kind of a whole saga. So if that happens to you, there's no way that you're going to keep doing it, and then you withdraw. So yes, thank you, Emma.
Yeah. David, I know that in the film and call to action is not just for us to feel moved by this, but moved to action, and the importance, I think, of government level action. And so maybe each of you, I know, what does that look like? How, in Kenya versus UK versus what, we need to do to make something that has a lasting or more profound trickle down impact?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to look at our own countries, but also we're talking about people's human rights in Africa, and should we interfere there? Well, I think Kenya, along with a lot of other nations, have ratified agreements internationally. And as a result of ratifying those agreements, I think their government has a responsibility to their citizens to ensure this doesn't occur. And I think we need to pressure our respective governments to pressure the other governments to ensure that this is adhered to. Human rights should be equal throughout the world.
Holding people to account, I guess at the end of the day, someone needs to hold people to account.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in country, I guess it's things like that health policy on PD. So we're doing a survey of which countries in Africa actually have mention of PD in their health policy and legislation, kind of building access to medications into the kind of package of healthcare that they offer to people, acknowledging that Parkinson's is a condition kind of worth investing in, and putting it on the radar, I guess, involving social protection, financial protection, things like that. But these are quite high level changes that need to happen, and we need to know that data about burden to kind of drive that as well. So we're missing that data that says, okay, well, how many people do have Parkinson's?
Okay.
So it's kind of this advocacy and awareness coupled with this data that together hopefully kind of drives these policy changes in the countries.
Right. And our voices, you're right, what we do, how we act, can have that impact as well. No action is too small to start to drive a difference. So David, and Olz, you described, this is a question from somebody watching, kind of some of the worst of human characteristics that you experienced in the stigma. Were there some experiences that were the opposite of that you had a willingness to help or an openness to share?
I think the connection that I personally had with the people I spoke to and we interviewed was very touching. It was quite lovely. I think it's important to mention one of those people featured in the film is no longer alive. And I think that's important. I didn't feel anyone that we interviewed was worse than me. And I don't know the full circumstances around that death, and I'm not suggesting any foul play, but it's so going back to the question, sorry, I'm wandering off. Did I see anything nice? Yes, I think our driver was
I was going to say the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, it was as touched by the things that were happening, even though he witnessed some of it and he didn't witness all of it. He witnessed our reactions to things, and he was very, very sensitive. He realized we'd gone through hell, and I think he was really lovely in the way he dealt with it.
And I think it is also worth saying a lot of the family members, or some of the family members, were actually supportive of the people with Parkinson's as well. I know there's one daughter in the film who says kind of her dad is her superhero, and even having Parkinson's doesn't change that. But it's needing to make other people around them also aware of that it doesn't change who you are, and you haven't been cursed, and it's not witchcraft. And as David said at the end of the film, it's just a disease.
Yeah. I'm going back to a question from the audience. My mom has Parkinson's. Unfortunately, my dad continues to deny that she is suffering. My dad, for 3 years now, refuses to take mom to a neurologist and only keeps in touch with godlike physicians. I don't mean for this to be a religious question, but how would your team recommend approaching someone, perhaps with this background, that maybe doesn't want to accept the disease?
Well, who's got the worst problem? The sufferer with Parkinson's, or the member of the family that's denying it? I know this is a complex thing to deal with, but I think the person asking this question must think about the person that's got Parkinson's a little bit more than the person that's trying to deal with them having Parkinson's.
Yeah.
I think,
yeah.
Yeah, education. So are there resources that you can kind of use to kind of let them understand that this is a disease, it's not just them? I think naming and seeing other people with the condition can kind of bring that legitimacy to it as well. It is difficult. I've not experienced anyone who continued to think that it was religious even after understanding the diagnosis. So once they kind of knew about it, it was like, oh, right, it's Parkinson's now. Obviously, the religious aspects are still there and the faith in God to heal, etc., but not denying that that it is a disease, or they could see a neurologist, etc. So I think just education and maybe giving them the resources to read around it, and meeting other people with Parkinson's as well to create that legitimacy. Go on, David.
Yeah, if I can add also, I'm very happy for people to pray for me, but please give me the drugs as well.
Very good point. Yeah, very good point. We're coming up to the top of the hour. I know that Olz and Tosh, you're headed to Tanzania just in a couple days for kind of the next steps. Like what's happening on that agenda?
A lot. It's very busy. I think Tash can list off everything that's happening.
Yeah, so as part of our research grant, we applied to our university for some money to do some more community engagement for the grant. So this involves a lot of community awareness events, workshops with stakeholders to understand how to build awareness about Parkinson's in the community, setting up a support group in the region where we're doing a prevalence study in Tanzania, and kind of filming. That's where Olz is bringing it, filming around the research grant. So the process of doing the research and how we're engaging with the communities, and also framing more around the impact of access to medication. So I meant basically with a prevalence study, some people in the community will have never been diagnosed before. So we're kind of looking at that journey from not knowing a diagnosis to being diagnosed and having access to medication, which can be life-changing. And so, yeah, hoping to kind of bring that good angle out of that. And yeah, hopefully Olz can help us do that.
What, right? And so there's another film coming, I know, and that's great. And congratulations to you all for creating something so powerful. I know that you are all now film award winners. You've won multiple awards already. You're nominated for more. So congratulations for that. Some call to actions. You have these in your handouts with the link, but share the film, share the message. David, your point was so great. It's not your job, it's all of our job. You've created a piece that we can share social media, share the message, get it out there. Donate, and there's a link to donate to help people with access to medication. If my memory's correct, it's 20 euros, 20 pounds is a month's worth of medication. I didn't feel like pulling the slides up, so I'm pulling a little off my head. And read, and Tasha's paper is there, and hopefully we'll continue to share the research as it comes out, and as we learn more. So for those of you attending, when you close out, there is the survey to take. We've got the link in the chat there. I'm so grateful to all of you for what you've done. I feel so fortunate that Tosh reached out and we were able to participate even in the smallest way to help. And
well, I think the biggest thanks goes to you, Cynthia, because at the end of the day, without LSVT and yourself, this film wouldn't have happened. So, and that's why we're all here now. So because of you guys. at
Well,
LSVT.
I appreciate that, but I'm pretty sure you guys would have got the film done no matter what. But we were certainly grateful to be able to participate. And I guess one last question before we close, if there's anybody out there who wants to reach out and say, what else can I do? What's their best course of action? Or do you have actionable items for them beyond what we've talked about? Or is there something else we can collaborate, bring people together?
Ash, have you got anything for that? You're pretty
I
best
think
placed.
the sharing is the biggest thing, and whether that's just sharing the link or sharing the story, you know, doing some screenings in your towns, in your cities, wherever you live. I think getting it out of the Parkinson's community as well is a big one, because sometimes we kind of circulate in the Parkinson's community where we need to kind of step out and make other people aware, you know, right from your kind of family community all the way through to your government politicians, your MPs, whoever represents your kind of areas to drive that policy. So yeah, I think sharing is the easiest thing to do.
And if you do want to ask any further questions or talk to us individually at all, I mean, I think our contact details are on the website link and possibly in your documents as well.
Superb. Well, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you again. This was wonderful. Thank you to everyone who attended or who will be viewing this online. We wish you all a wonderful rest of your day, and we will keep following your message. We'll keep sharing it, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Cynthia,
much
for having us.